Hello everyone, my name's Paul.
I'm Nicola.
And I'm Fabiha.
Welcome to our podcast talking about careers in libraries and the information sector. This is the second podcast in a series of 3. The focus here is going to be on innovation in universities' libraries. I think maybe that there's a bit of a misconception about libraries, that they're static institutions and they're very slow to move with the times, when actually I think we know the opposite is true. They're quite often at the forefront of innovation and are really quick to innovate actually and take on new ideas, new systems. So change is constant, and I think they really libraries embrace technology. So that's a bit of a preamble. As in our previous one, we've got some questions and themes that we can hang our discussion around.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start off by asking you, Paul, about how digitisation of information has impacted careers in libraries and related fields.
Yeah, so digitisation has been massive, and the change has been in many different ways. I'm speaking here as the old hand, if you like, with the greyer hair. And when I first came into libraries 18 years ago or so, my whole job was dealing with physical stock. We had a short loan collection, so we were loaning out the physical stock for shorter periods. And within a couple of years, that service had become no longer needed because of the digitisation of other material. So I think my focus now is more concentrated on how people navigate digitised services rather than the physical book stock. So that sort of really has changed my job. There's so much more information available digitally now, but that brings its own complexities as well, because you get what we call information overload. So the need to navigate that information is what's needed. We've had, probably since I've been here, a few years before I arrived at the library, we've had an e-first policy. So we buy content electronically first, and then we might back it up with physical copies. Some of the other changes that have occurred, our content team that we referred to in our last podcast, they would have been processing a lot of book stock, whereas now they're making e-books available, which is still a concentrated process, but completely different. There's not so much handling of the stock. Some of those colleagues might be checking e-licenses and doing the metadata work around new content rather than working with physical book stock. Working online at distance is easier. Sharing of information is easier. We touched on open access, but that has made share it. A lot of that material is digital, and we're sharing that more widely. And the library building has changed as well, because you don't need so much space for physical stock. Then you can offer more study space, and we've seen a change in there. There's been a big increase in digital databases as well, and maybe it's increased workload. We always think, the advance in technology is going to mean there's less work for everyone. It actually means there's more opportunities. So there's some initial thoughts on digitisation.
Yeah, and extra reflection from me as Research Intelligence Manager. Gosh, I think my role, or the equivalent of my role sort of several years ago, before all of this digitisation, must have been extremely difficult, because it would have involved physically getting the books, having a look at who's referencing who, how many times has the book been taken out. There's all different ways that the metrics can be used, but I think it would have been impossible to do what I can do now, essentially at the touch of a button, because we buy various sort of databases and systems, some of which are used for things like literature searching, some of which are used for metrics and reporting, and I think, yeah, my role has evolved so much. The Research Intelligence Service, really, speaking across the UK at least, has probably only been properly in existence for 5 to 10 years. I think at Lancaster we launched ours in 2019, and we were sort of one of the first to sort of build it up properly. And yeah, without the digitisation of records and things, it just wouldn't be possible. So moving on from that, Fabiha, can you provide examples of any other sort of innovative library programs or services that have gained popularity in recent years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of going back to what Paul said about that kind of constant change that is happening, and we also kind of as libraries have to continue changing to respond to those kind of wider changes across the university and sort of broader society in general. I guess something really kind of unique to Lancaster is the digitisation of our archives and distinct collections that we have. But then we've also kind of been involved in innovative sort of projects and ideas relating to decolonisation, for example, and linked ideas and projects such as citation justice, which is something we very briefly touched on in our last podcast. But essentially, it is something that we're looking into about, in terms of research intelligence, about how citations are being used and if they are sort of the right metric or not for kind of things like job promotions, which they're often used for, and also the kind of systemic under-citation of particular groups. So, for example, women and also Black, Asian and minority ethnic academics. So there's so much kind of in that field of work, which is sort of like deeply embedded issues, which are not just something that are issues in our own library, but are kind of wider issues in kind of libraries across the country and also internationally. And then I think, again, that sort of open access and support for research intelligence and kind of improving research culture and sort of research practices, that's something that is definitely, I guess, gaining more momentum in recent years. And there's a lot more focus on that, which I think is really brilliant. And something that, people might see more of in terms of the physical library and coming in as students or visitors would be things like the Feel Good Hub we have in our own library and the sort of books that are available there. We have our Colouring In Cafe. We previously had a breakfast club and we used to have board game nights as well. So kind of things that we're doing to engage with people visiting the library. And I guess kind of in a broader sense as well, libraries can act as the sort of space of like sanctuary and can act as like third spaces, warm spaces for people. And our library is one that is open to the community. And we've got our community cards as well, which is, I think, a really brilliant initiative that I think more libraries across the country are also sort of taking up, which is brilliant. And again, I think, we have also the sort of beyond the kind of internal university circles, we do a lot of outreach work. So Paul, you've worked with different schools and colleges across not only Lancashire, but like Cumbria as well, which is brilliant. And we've worked with Lancaster Black History Group and we've created different collections. So I think there's a lot going on, but also there's, as we kind of said, all of our work also kind of involves different project work based on kind of what is going on in that moment in time. So there's always a lot of innovation. I think that's one thing I perhaps didn't expect coming in. I think I was like maybe thinking that there was just set things that you had to do and I would have that day-to-day kind of fixed rota, but actually there are so many different projects to get involved in depending on what is kind of happening in the wider sector. And I know we'll speak maybe a bit more about this in this podcast or in the future podcast about AI, but that's definitely something that is quite major and kind of upcoming.
Yeah, and I think what you've explained there is innovation isn't always technical.
Yes,
it can be social, and it can be there's so many different types of innovation. That's great.
And just one extra thing to pick up as well is like innovation for our own staff. So we did recently purchase LinkedIn Learning, which has really enabled staff to be able to deep dive into such a variety of areas. So anything from sort of Excel training up to other specific softwares. And I think where in the past it would have cost sort of hundreds, thousands to do that, being able to say, here, log into this, here's some nice videos, and you can do it in your own sort of dedicated time within your working day, and we can upskill our staff, which just helps support the way that the library continues to innovate and develop.
Evolve.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you can also learn how to play the guitar on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's also a bit of it's not just kind of entirely things related to sort of work, but I think there is that kind of a sense of looking after well-being as well, and that kind of being quite integral to what we're doing. And I guess kind of going back into like the open access things as well, there is so much innovation happening there. So we recently adopted this rights retention scheme, which would kind of, I think the best way to describe it would be giving authors the right to kind of be able to share their publications. Would you say that's
so in the past, even though an academic would have conducted their own research, once they paid, or the library paid for it to be published, they didn't actually retain the rights themselves. The publisher who was getting paid to publish this research were then able to say, this is ours now. So Lancaster University, along with a whole host of other UK universities, did a dedicated letter to publishers saying, look, we're still going to use you, but when our authors publish with you, we will be including a statement that says our authors retain the rights to their own work. And it was almost done with a bit of trepidation. We kind of thought publishers would say, what do you mean? That's not how it's done. But actually, there's not really been any pushback at all, and they've said, fair enough. We wouldn't have suggested that, but if you want the rights, that's fine. So that's a really, really underrated key win for us. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with like sort of innovation and pushing sort of kind of traditional boundaries. And that kind of expectation that you were saying about, you were kind of expecting publishers to say no and kind of hit back, but actually saying, this is the right thing to do, and having that kind of progressive mindset, I think is really sort of critical to a lot of what we're doing in our roles.
I think what's interesting about open access as well is it shows how the library is working with the wider community. We're not necessarily just focused on students, although that's a big part of our support. We're also supporting the wider community, the academic community, staff and students, the whole community of Lancaster University, which again, people might not realise maybe.
Yeah. And also as well, that sort of leading on from that, the assumption is that the main audience for academic publications is other universities, academics, students who are potentially going to go into academia, and it's just not true. It's absorbed by charities, the NHS, even just the general public. Tax money goes into funding research. Why would you not be able to access that? So the open research agenda really is about having global access. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to what other emerging technologies are influencing the information sector, and how do we stay, as professionals, stay current with these advancements?
So I think in recent times, one of the biggest changes has been how sort of much technology has played a role in our jobs. So when I joined the library, I had previously worked at the university, but I'd been doing a placement away in Manchester and then came back and started working in the library. And it was just during pandemic times where no one was allowed in the office anymore. Everyone was suddenly online. It was really very strange, but somehow it enabled almost more efficiency in working, because suddenly you didn't have to spend, 10 to 15 minutes going between meetings and getting organised. You could just, at the touch of a button, I'm in one call, I'm in another call, potentially to the detriment of some roles. So we do have a really sort of a lot of importance placed on don't overwhelm yourself. Just because you can work super efficiently does not mean you should work like that 100% of the time. That's not what we expect of people. No. Just to clear that up. Microsoft Teams, that was our sort of chosen platform. And when you're working from home, particularly when no one was, at least in our library, used to working from home. Now everyone's like, oh yeah, it makes total sense. Oh, I'll work from home, 4 days this week, 2 days that week, and there was a lot of flex. There was a lot of sort of getting used to this new technology, and it's amazing, I think, how quickly that has just become the norm.
Yeah.
And meetings are assumed, it'll be online unless you're on campus, kind of thing. I will say, having said that, it is different in different teams across the library. So for Fabiha and I have been in the open research team. Some days we will, need to have in-person meetings, but the sort of frontline service that we have, our operations and user services, unless we're going to attach iPads to robots, they're going to struggle to, physically direct people around the building and answer queries and do all of that kind of stuff. So,
But what they did do was develop their chat system over the pandemic, which has proved really successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And has given them some flexibility in their working day as well.
Yeah. Do you have any reflections, Paul, on what I see as the next emerging thing, AI?
AI, yes. Yeah. It's the next big challenge of libraries. And I think they are at the forefront of this challenge. I can't say X, Y, and Z is going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years or whatever. I think the idea of machine learning, AI, has been around for a while, but it's really leapt into the public imagination with ChatGPT. Our library has definitely been in the forefront of conversations around AI. We're in that sort of stage at the moment where we're trying to set boundaries. I don't know if that's right word, but discuss where the boundaries are. So students are asking, can I use this tool? Can I use this tool, in my work? And there's obviously an academic integrity around some, can I use this tool to write my essay? No. Can I use it to check the grammar? Maybe. So we're sort of, the library is really woven into that integrity debate. A lot of AI tools are being developed to sit within databases. So I think it's happening in Scopus, maybe. I think it's happening in there. And I think the way maybe that people search might evolve over time. We might, my job might evolve into how do we prompt engineer rather than how we search. So, but what we often discuss in libraries and, with the web, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So at the moment, people are saying, if I use this AI tool, it gives me 2 million of the top best results. Well, I don't think that's of any use to anybody to get 2 million results. You've still got to investigate the quality. So I think at the moment we're wrestling with all those issues at the moment. But I went to a Libraries and Information Literacy annual conference back in in March, and that was the centre. It was the keynote speech. It was what's happening with AI. But we have noticed over the last couple of months, the last 6 months, that roles focused on AI are appearing in job searches. And I think Manchester have employed somebody and Huddersfield with AI in their title.
Wow.
So
I think like more than anything in libraries, it is being seen as just like an opportunity for, obviously people can do good with AI, but, also bad. And I think sometimes there is that kind of fear associated with it, but I think it's just kind of making the most of it and seeing potential ways in which it could be used to benefit users. So even, for example, in our citation justice project, in the future, we might look at, how can AI be used in a beneficial way, rather than kind of thinking about all of the ways in which it could kind of add harm to that kind of issue. But yeah, no, absolutely, it is sort of it is something that I almost hadn't actually expected to really come into the library world as much as it has, and I also kind of went to I think 2 different conferences that were both again very much focused on AI, and hadn't expected that.
yeah.
Gosh, I haven't been to a conference recently, guys. But it's really interesting thinking about AI with research intelligence, and just a quick reflection, Paul, on what you were saying about, you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. With research intelligence, one of the things I do usually first, depending on what report I'm doing, is I say, these are all the limitations of this data, because I might be using a certain database, or there might be other sort of limitations. And I say, this is why this report is bad, XYZ, because I want that to be understood first. Yes, it can give indications and it is really useful. And it's kind of the same with like the Scopus AI tool, which you mentioned. So how this works is you can put a sort of phrase or a few keywords in there, and it'll go, ba-ding, these are the sort of top 5 papers that we recommend. Here's a short summary of them. And, not to attack the Scopus AI tool kind of personally, but there was a webinar that I did attend, and I asked the question, like, how is it taken into account the country that this research has been produced from? Like, how is it representative? Is it really, showing us the best?
Yeah.
And is it being clear enough that you need to also do, a proper literature search alongside this? And right now, I think the answer is no, it doesn't do that, and it needs a lot of development. But nevertheless, engaging with how it enhances our roles, but there is a long way to go, despite the kind of rush on AI.
And I think that's interesting, and some colleagues will be very early adopters, and they'll be, and they're sort of pushing the boundaries of AI and seeing what it can do. Others, myself included, we're waiting to see how it settles, and is it going to be a really big bang and everything changes, a bit like the internet when it first came in, or is it going to be more gradual sort of change? But like you say, we're applying some of the same thinking to these tools as we would as the other. Are they ethical? Are they giving a good overview of results?
I think also in terms of international partnerships, Nicola, you recently went away to the Sunway campus. And one of the things that I remember you mentioning was that our colleagues kind of on that campus, we were really difficult to kind of contact in terms of hours and stuff because of the difference in time.
Yes, an 8-hour time difference.
Yeah, but equally, the sort of, again, coming back to digitization and sort of the ability to have hybrid meetings, online meetings, I think that's definitely sort of assisted in sort of how we're able to innovate and collaborate with international partners.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. We had kind of, meetings at 7 a.m, 8 a.m, which is, tea time for colleagues over in Malaysia. And we did manage to get funding to do a kind of overseas trip, myself and the head of open research. And it really sort of enabled us to sort of speed up the way that we were working together. But it is still, Microsoft Teams and all of those tools and the availability of being able to access Scopus and other tools and things that is enhancing our work there.
Yeah, and learning from each other, and yeah.
And I think the general term partnerships is interesting as well. So we're trying to work in partnership, whether it's internationally, whether it's locally, whether it's on campus with departments, whether it's on campus with students. We're trying to work in partnership with other people rather than provide services, which is what we used to do in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for listening, everyone. Tune in to the next episode.